So, latest numbers out of New South Wales. No one's saying this. No one is saying this stuff. And believe me, I'm living this right now, so I'm deeply invested in telling you the truth of what's going on. There are 23 people in hospital in New South Wales. 6 are currently in ICU. At least 1 is on a ventilator right now. I hope everyone in ICU gets better. But New South Wales is on top of the COVID outbreak. Whatever worries they had in the Central Coast and Wollongong have disappeared. No issues there anymore. And how's this? Of the 5 and a bit million people who live in and around Sydney, almost 1 million people have been tested since June 16. That's when the limo driver, who under the rules set by the New South Wales government didn't have to be vaccinated, didn't have to wear a mask, yet was transporting COVID positive people from the airport. 962,291 people have had a COVID test. Of all of those people, just 73 new cases have been exposed in the community since the limo driver thing on the 16th of June. The positive rate, as you can see on the screen, is not 10%, 5%, 1%, or even 0.01%. It's 0.007%. Yet, despite the fact that 1 million people have been tested, no one has died, and 0.07% of everyone who felt crook, knew someone was crook, went somewhere where somebody who thought they were crook, who's gone and been tested, ends up with the virus. We still are in the middle of what I sadly like to call COVID theatre. This is where you've got to keep people scared. How do you keep people scared? Well, you have to ramp up the announcements, including the announcement today that we are only halfway through the lockdown that is currently taking place in Greater Sydney. Now, I get it. If you're watching the outside of Sydney, it's like, hey, enough. But come on, 5 million people are locked up in this right now. I blew up when it was Melbourne. I blew up when it was Brisbane, so forgive me as I blow up about it in Sydney right now. Gold standard.
The New South Wales government, based on the health advice, which is our key indicator, made the difficult decision to announce the extension of the lockdown and the existing restrictions in the regions for 1 week further.
That's the lady who saved Australia. Remember the magazine articles? Well, that decision, which was announced today at 11 a.m, wasn't made today. It was made yesterday, when not all but a big chunk of New South Wales Cabinet got together and made the decision to extend this thing for another week. They knew that decision at 4 p.m. yesterday. They should have held a press conference at 4:15 yesterday, or 5:15, or interrupt the 6 p.m. news. Oh, no, but because this is COVID theatre, you leak it to the papers, so then it's not a real shock when you make the announcement. Put simply, people will not be jumping out of windows, screaming in every direction and blowing up Deluxe, as they should, about a virus that 1 million people have been tested for and 0.007 actually have. Now, part of the COVID theatre is, apart from announcing that tomorrow you might have an announcement, even though you have an announcement on the day, but you delay it till the next day so you can slowly seep it out into the media. And this is what I'm really annoyed with. In an emergency, you don't have a communication strategy. You just respond to the emergency, right? But when you have time to work out the best way to break bad news, you are not in an emergency. All right? But part of COVID theatre is, apart from an announcement about an announcement, you then also have to make an announcement about an announcement about an announcement of a plan for after the announcement of an extension of the lockdown. Welcome to COVID theatre.
And I'll be pleased to update the community tomorrow, because I know more than anyone how important it is for people to have time to plan. I hope to be able to communicate to the community tomorrow on what next week looks like. And that will factor into our decision making as to whether it finishes on Friday or whether we continue for a period longer. And experts are working on this, is to provide in the next few days a roadmap, if you like, a plan for what exiting the lockdown looks like.
Ah, a roadmap is what we're looking forward to now. This is garbage. And also, speaking about COVID theatre right now, is that most kids in and around Sydney, the Central Coast where there are no cases, the Illawarra where there are no cases, the Blue Mountains where there are no cases, won't be able to go to school despite the fact that they have spent the entirety of a 2-week school holiday at home. The particular sting in the tail is that even if they went back to school next week, it'd only be on Tuesday because there's a professional development day on Monday. See, no change for the public servants. Pay rises for the politicians. Pay rises for the public servants. The teachers get a professional development day when the kids haven't been around for a couple of weeks. But here's why I say COVID theatre about schools. Gladys Berejiklian today confirmed what you and I have known since the very start of this thing. Schools aren't a problem. Kids would be safe. She said it, right?
It's not because schools aren't a safe place. They are a safe place. And as I said, the reason why it didn't resume in Greater Sydney in the next week is not because schools aren't safe. Schools are very safe. Again, it's not because schools aren't safe. Schools are very safe environments.
So, sorry, if schools are safe 3 times, could you please explain why kids have to learn over the internet next week?
But what isn't safe at the moment is literally hundreds of thousands of people moving around at the same time during drop-off and pick-up, and that mobility issue is what was concerning health.
Seriously? Seriously, kids are safe, but drop-off and pick-up could be the problem. Now, let me break this to the Premier and to everyone else who is watching who thinks, you know what, this is a really sensible decision. Parents, for more than a year, have been involved in a thing called Kiss and Drop Off, where they have not been mingling around together. They're keeping their 1.5 metres away, and every single school in the state would be able to set up a scenario where kids could be dropped off by their parents in their car. And if they're arriving by bus or train, guess what? Their parents aren't with them, which means there's no problem. That's why it's COVID theatre. A system has already been in place and worked to keep parents apart, to make sure that parents who don't have the virus don't give it to kids who don't give it to teachers. And while I know eventually we will forgive them for what they have done today, the reason people will not forget what happened today is because here is a diverse area of Sydney where there are 0 cases, where it wouldn't matter if the parents were pashing in the playground. Because have a look at this. In the Blue Mountains, there are no COVID cases. In the Hawkesbury, no COVID cases. Lane Cove, no COVID cases. Mossman, no COVID cases. The Northern Beaches, who already were locked down over Christmas, let them go back to school. 0 cases. And in Penrith, 0 cases. So the parents don't have it, the kids don't have it, the teachers don't have it. And in the areas where one person in your council area might have it, you can drop the kids off and not mingle with other parents. That's why I call it COVID theatre. Later in the show, we'll get an expert on to explain exactly why kids are not the problem with this. And the idea that their education can just be robbed like this and no one seems to care is really infuriating. How can we ever forget that they were willing to do that? That they were willing to do it in Melbourne for a couple of weeks, that they made people who had no COVID cases in regional Victoria do it, and now they're going to do it again in Sydney. It's a fool's gold standard, not the gold standard anymore. And again, when all else fails, when you are in a spot of bother, what does every single state government do? Oh, that's right, you have to blame the federal government. And the health hazard was playing that part today on the stage of COVID theatre.
Certainly the lack of supply, lack of certainty of supply going forward is causing us massive concern. To say that if we had had the supply that we wanted and we like, or would have wanted, we wouldn't now be in this situation here in New South Wales. We would like, New South Wales Health, New South Wales Government would like more vaccine. The situation we're in now is largely because we haven't been able to get the vaccine that we need. So I'm not reflecting specifically on the federal government there because I think the federal government faced a very tough ask.
When all else fails, it's their fault. This is the bloke who, of course, did not take responsibility for Ruby Princess. By not taking responsibility for Ruby Princess, he set the gold standard. That meant no one paid a price in Victoria. The governments were re-elected on peddling fear in how many states around the country? But again, we're talking about COVID theatre here. So when asked questions today that were completely reasonable, that supposedly in the middle of a Hunger Games, a fight to the death for vaccine, where supposedly you have to deny kids the chance to go to school despite the fact that, as the Premier says 3 times, schools are safe, that New South Wales Health decided to give this very rare vaccine that, remember, 15% of Australians will get around to it. I love that fact, right? Let alone the 36% who say, I'm going to wait. But the people who say they can't be bothered getting a booking right now, is that the vaccine was, of course, delivered and administered to a bunch of kids in year 12 at a very swanky private school. Now, I don't have a problem with the kids. I have a problem with the health department who made the decision that this so special vaccine, let's give it to a bunch of kids at a rich private school, as opposed to all of the other people who supposedly need it in order to avoid lockdown. But of course, it doesn't really matter whether they had the vaccine or not, because that's a boarding school, which means they didn't go home for Christmas, for the school holidays. But when asked about it today, this is what accountability looks like in New South Wales.
Minister Hazzard, how damaging is it for the public's perception of the state government's vaccine rollout that New South Wales Health, your department, accidentally vaccinated about 160 Joey's boys, and how embarrassed are you?
What I find more embarrassing, James, is that you would make that sort of question accusation against frontline health staff who work their butts off and who tomorrow will have achieved a million vaccinations into arms. You know what? The school intended it well, there was a mistake, and so what? It's happened. Out of 1 million vaccinations, move on.
So Health Hazard, on the behalf of everyone who either won't be able to leave their house or kids' education will be done for the next week or so, screw you. COVID theatre. 1 million tests, 70-something cases, 0.007% of which have the virus. No one's died.